What's going on? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to go over MITRE and their cybersecurity frameworks. So originally, MITRE is not a cybersecurity company. It is broader than that. So MITRE, as per the definition, they are dedicated to solving problems for a safer world. And one of their contributions is the creation and development of cybersecurity frameworks. So as you can see, the first one is ATT&CK, and the second one is Shield. So Shield and ATT&CK. So technically they are related to each other, as you will see later in the video. Now, ATT&CK stands for Adversary, Tactics, Techniques, Common, Knowledge. Shield is used for active defense. So what's exactly the use for ATT&CK and Shield for you as a cybersecurity specialist? You could be blue teamer, you could work in the blue team, or you could work in the red team. So ATT&CK is important and vastly useful if you want to shed lights and understand or gather information about the attacker's tactics. Okay, and for every tactic, you will see the attacker's techniques. Okay, we will see that in a minute. So we will gather information about how the attacks or how the hackers conduct their attacks, divided by the tactic they use. Okay, and for every tactic, you'll see the techniques the attackers use based on real-world scenarios, as you will see in the video. So you can use the information to protect your company or to build a strategy for your blue team. ATT&CK is vastly used by cybersecurity companies, blue teamers, and even red teamers, pen testers. So they understand how to methodically conduct their tests for their clients. Now the Shield is it is similar to ATT&CK, but Shield's objective or perspective is to apply, it is to just teach you the hacker's techniques by applying active defense. That's why I say active defense. So in Shield, you will see techniques and tactics that you can apply as a blue teamer, okay, under the context of limited offense, okay, to protect your resources. So let's create a new page to understand more about the ATT&CK. So in the ATT&CK, you will see you have here, it's a matrix. In every matrix, there are sub-techniques like that. And you go on with the list. So here you have the tactic. And here you have the techniques. Technique 1, technique 2. And every tactic is laid down based on its position in the cyber kill chain. So let's take an example. So this is the official website of the ATT&CK. Now, as you can see, this is the matrix, and we see that tactics are divided this way, and we have the techniques under each tactic. So the first tactic is reconnaissance, and the first stage, if you are a red teamer, okay, is to conduct reconnaissance. You will see the techniques under this category or under this tactic. So as a red teamer, okay, your first stage is to conduct reconnaissance. So by going to ATT&CK and taking a look at the techniques under the reconnaissance, you will have more exposure to the real world application of this tactic. So for example, if you are to conduct a reconnaissance for your client, you will see examples here. For example, the technique here is reconnaissance. Let's take sub-technique from here, active scanning. So active scanning is a technique part of reconnaissance. You will see on the right information about the technique. So the ID, the sub-techniques, if you want to take a look at the sub-techniques under this, the tactic, the parent tactic, and here data sources, network device logs, packet capture. So here, active scanning, under the active scanning, you will see, if any, of course, sub-techniques. So Active scanning includes scanning IP blocks and vulnerability scanning. And you will see definition for the active scanning. So as per definition, before compromising a victim, adversaries may execute active reconnaissance scans to gather information that can be used during targeting. Active scans are those where the adversary probes victim infrastructure via network traffic, as opposed to other forms of reconnaissance that do not involve direct interaction. So basically, as a red teamer, okay, and you want to just take a look at how the reconnaissance is applied in real scenarios, you'll go to ATT&CK and first click on the reconnaissance as the first tactic, and you'll understand the techniques over here. So first, you scan the IP blocks, and then you scan the vulnerabilities. Now, let's change the hat here. As a blue teamer, okay, you know that the first stage of any attack is the reconnaissance. And by going to reconnaissance and understanding the sub-techniques, and here you take a look at the mitigation. So the mitigation is, this technique cannot be easily mitigated with the preventive controls, since it is based on behaviors performed outside of the scope of enterprise defenses and controls. Efforts should focus on minimizing the amount of sensitivity of data available to external parties. So basically here, as a blue teamer, you know that from the mitigation here, it is not possible to prevent someone from scanning your network or scanning the vulnerabilities. It is best to just minimize the attack exposure or minimize the chances for the attack to just manifest. As you can see, minimize the amount and sensitivity of data available. This means that you have to, if you have ports that are open and you don't use them, just close them. Detection, how, as you can see, this is also the detection, how to detect that. So it's different mitigations, and detection are different. Mitigation is to prevent, detection is to detect. So obviously, detection is tied to having firewall and network traffic captures, intrusion detection systems, and so on. So as a blue teamer, that's your that's how you gain access to these information. As a red teamer, that's how you use it. You just take a look at the technique, right, and see if there are sub-techniques that are related to that technique. For example, scanning IP blocks, how this relates in a real-world scenario. Let's take a look at this sub-technique in detail. Scanning IP blocks, you see here first the definition. Adversaries may scan IP blocks in order to gather victim information. So you can see here, such as which IP addresses are actively in use, right? As well as more detailed information about host assigned these addresses. Scans may range from simple pings to more nuanced scans that may reveal host software versions via server banners. Now, as a red teamer, you know that scanning IP blocks is done by Nmap or many other network mappers like Nmap, Sparta. The tools are not listed here. If we go back, click on vulnerability scanning, for example, as a sub-technique of reconnaissance. You see here also definition of that. Okay, now let's take a look at the active defense or the shield home. So the shield home is, as you can see, it relies or it uses active defense. Active defense, as I said earlier, it is the application of limited offense to protect your resources. For example, let's take a look at the tactics. So, as you can see here, the tactics are a bit different. Channel, collect, contain, detect, disrupt, facilitate. Let's take a look, for example, at detect. So, detection of adversarial activity. So here is another perspective. So for example, let's take a look at decoy accounts as a technique in the detected phase. Create an account that's used for active defense purposes. Click on that. So as a blue teamer, when I see decoy account as a technique, I take a look at the description. Create an account that's used for active defense purposes. A decoy account is one that's created specifically for defensive or deceptive purposes. It can be in the form of user accounts, service accounts, software accounts. The decoy account can be used to make a system, service, or software look more realistic or to entice an action. So what does that mean? It means that if you want to detect threats and attackers, okay, you just went to detect as a technique, and you see under the technique sub-techniques like decoy accounts. Now, decoy accounts is, as we read together, it's creating decoy accounts made available to the attacker to just take over. And you see explanation of the opportunities here. What are the opportunities if you apply this? There is an opportunity to study adversary and collect first-hand observations about them and their tools. There's an opportunity also to introduce decoy information, user systems, to influence adversaries' future actions. Use cases. Now, use cases is taken from real-world scenarios, as I said earlier. A defender can create decoy user accounts, which are used to make a decoy system or network look more realistic. Procedures is how you do it. So how do you create decoy accounts? So it's explained here. And this is a map to the ATT&CK techniques. So what is exactly this map? What's the mention of this here? So basically, we said earlier that the shield strategy is to apply active defense. So by creating decoy accounts, you're just luring attackers to use these accounts to understand their behavior. So the difference is between these techniques and the ones here. So here we have what is mapped to the decoy accounts here: valid accounts, account discovery, manipulation, gather victim identity, fishing for information. So it's like a mapping between a red team tactic and a blue team tactic. So here, valid accounts, account discovery. Here the mention of how the attackers are conducting their attacks if they want to discover accounts you have or they want to take over the accounts. Now, in here, you see an application, an active application of how to defend yourself, okay? Apart from creating strong passwords, is creating decoy accounts. So that's the map between them, the relation. If you want to see more information about the mapping, you can go to ATT&CK mapping, click on Overview, and okay. So by tactic, so reconnaissance. If you go back to ATT&CK, so these are the tactics in the ATT&CK, as you can see. And if you click on one of them, we see the map. Okay, we see the map or the tactics techniques mapped to these tactic by the shield. For example, let's take a look at the execution. So this is the ATT&CK technique, and this is the active defense technique. For example, Windows management instrumentation is execution. In adversary engagement scenario, there is an opportunity to allow or restrict admin access to support your defensive objectives. So the active defense of this, a defender can remove admin access from the local user to prevent an adversary from being able to utilize WMI. So as you can see here, it's kind of telling you how to mitigate this or how to perform the blue team action to prevent this. So here is the technique the attackers are using, and here is how to protect yourself. It is very useful and valuable resource actually to take a look and understand how these two frameworks work as a blue teamer. You want to gather information about how attackers conduct their attacks, what are the stages, what are the techniques, the sub-techniques of every single tactic, the real-world applications, and also you want to map these to the active defense to protect yourself or the organization you're trying to protect. Now, let's take a real-world example. So, for example, let's say you are studying, or you just moved. Let's go to my board and explain this in detail. So, new page. Okay, let's say that your organization, okay, is using Google Cloud or is planning to use Google Cloud. Okay, now in your company, let's say here on premises. So on your company or your client, you have web server, you have email server, let's say you have file server. Okay, now your company decided, or your client decided to move these resources to the cloud. Okay, now before moving to the cloud, your company or your client asked you or tasked you to conduct a risk management, okay, risk management or risk assessment for moving these assets to the cloud. What are the risks associated with moving these assets to the cloud? Now, technically, the web server and email file server will be no longer hosted in the on-premises, will be hosted on Google Cloud. So part of your assessment is to lay down real-world cases of how attackers use the cloud attacks. So you want to study cloud attacks. You want to take real-world scenarios. So basically, you want to study all of this, okay? So one way to take information about how the attackers conduct attacks against cloud resources is to use the ATT&CK. So let's go here. So what we do here, instead of just looking for your resources here, or you can just use a search. So let's look for cloud. So if you look at the cloud, you can see results here. And we start with the cloud discovery, cloud infrastructure, cloud dashboard. So these are these are techniques, part of tactics. Now let me cancel this one. Okay. So the reconnaissance, we have these techniques and active scanning. There are sub-techniques, as you can see if you click on the gray button. Gather victim information host. Let's look for a cloud. Let me get back to the results. The first one is cloud discovery. Let's take a look at this. So cloud discovery is a sub-technique or a technique that's part of discovery. So if you go back here to the, let me collapse these. Okay, so discovery. The discovery here, we have cloud service discovery, cloud service dashboard, cloud infrastructure discovery. Since you're moving to the cloud, these techniques are your concern. So let's take a look at the cloud infrastructure discovery. So cloud infrastructure discovery here, you see information about this technique. These are the platforms that are affected by this technique. So if you're moving to Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud, you have to gather information about this technique. So that's how the attacker conduct the cloud infrastructure discovery. They would adversary may attempt to discover resources that are available within an infrastructure as a service environment. This includes compute service resources. In your case, it's compute engine in Google Cloud, virtual machines, snapshots, as well as resources of other services, including the storage and database services. So in a risk assessment plan, you would put that moving the resources to the cloud, or let's say the attackers have the ability to just conduct discovery about your cloud resources. It is a risk, but not actually that kind of risk that you would need to take an action immediately for. So that's the mitigations and detection. So what's important in the mitigations here is telling you that limit permissions to discover a cloud infrastructure in accordance with least privilege. Organizations should limit the number of users within the organization with an IAM role that has administrative privileges. So even if you're talking about, although you cannot prevent discovery, okay, you can just mitigate by managing users who are using the cloud resources. For example, I give only one user as, give them the administrative privileges, and other users are normal users. So that's user account management. So if your cloud account is compromised, or one of your users are compromised, hopefully it will be normal user or just regular users, not the admin user. For example, this is an example. Now, if you search more for a cloud, let's say you want to take a look at the examples of real attacks happen on the cloud. So, modify cloud compute infrastructure. Let's take a look at more techniques. Account discovery, account manipulation. Let's take a look at this. So, account manipulation, additional cloud credentials. Sub-technique of that is additional cloud credentials, exchange email delegate permissions, add Office 365 global administrator rule. That's where the attacker gain access to your account. They manipulate the account. Example. That's an example applied to. Let's click on this example. So UNC 2552 is a suspected Russian state-sponsored threat group responsible for the 2020 SolarWinds software supply chain intrusion. That's a real-world example of cloud attacks. Victims of this campaign include government, consulting, technology, telecom, and other organizations in North America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The group also compromised at least one think tank by late 2019. So these groups, or this group, use account manipulation technique to gain access to cloud accounts. Okay. How do they do it? Let's take a look at click on the group or procedure example and take a look at the techniques used. So they use account discovery, they discover the account manipulation, exchange, email delegate permissions. Maybe they gain access to an account and then they elevate their permissions. Account manipulation, additional cloud credentials, added credentials to auth, applications, and service principals, collecting data. So you can take a look at the list here of how the attack has happened. Of course, categorized and divided by the technique. So that's the attacker's technique that they achieved or used. But of course, not all of the techniques relate to the cloud attack that we are talking about. It's an explanation of the group and their tactics. So if you're gathering information about a specific group, you can just take it from here. Now, how is that concerned you as a person who is moving to the cloud, from on-premises to the cloud? So technically, this is an example of a group that might target your resources, because as you can see by the explanation, they target the cloud accounts. An example is the SolarWinds. So you want to take a look at their techniques, the techniques used, and then create a profile for this group and see how you can use also the shield to create the active defenses. For example, let's go back and take a look at the technique. So the technique is persistence, account manipulation. Let me get back. I think we are lost. Cloud. So we've taken a look at account manipulation, which is part of, yes. So if we go back to the shield, we click on the ATT&CK mapping and we go to persistence to see the active defenses, how we can protect ourselves. So if you go to the sub technique is account or additional cloud credentials. Account manipulation. So we have 2, 3. The ID here is take a look at the ID 1098. So 1098 we have 3. So the first one is there's an opportunity to create a detection with a moderately high probability of success. A defender can implement monitoring to alert if a user account is altered outside normal business hours from remote locations. So that's how you configure a monitoring system to monitor if a user account is accessed outside working hours or normal business hours. That's one way to protect. Here also the same idea, there is an opportunity to study the adversary and collect first-hand observations about them and their tools. Now the shield is saying that a defender can use decoy accounts and monitor them for any activity that might reveal adversary manipulation. We have talked about this, so you can create a decoy account, fake accounts, just to lure victims, to lure attackers and study their behavior and determine or detect the attack. Another one is defender can enforce strong authentication requirements such as password changes, two-factor authentication to impact or disrupt an adversary's activity. So these are the three defense or active defense strategies that you can apply to just minimize the risk of account manipulation technique. Okay, so that's an example. I just try to give an example of how you can apply the ATT&CK on a real case. So that was about this, and see you in the next video.